Perez, Riccardo, Tsunoda. All three of these drivers have their careers on the line. At least one of these drivers will be out of the seat at the end of this season or have their reputation as a fast driver tarnished. In this video, I'll go through what I think each driver needs to do for the rest of the year to ensure that they keep their reputation and that they have a good seat next season. So I've had a few days, a few hours to think about this Riccardo comeback and the implications that it has for the three drivers involved. And I've been wondering what they need to do to make sure that they keep their seats going forward and keep their seats next year and have the best seat available to them. Pretty much, each of these drivers have so much at stake right now. So much is on the line for them. So much that they have to do in the remaining, 11 races or whatever it is, to ensure that they are highly regarded and that they have a good seat next year. So starting off with Perez, what does Perez need to do throughout the rest of the season, starting from the Hungarian Grand Prix, to ensure that he's still in the Red Bull next year, that he's still Max Verstappen's teammate and he still has a chance for podiums, pole positions and wins? So the first thing Perez needs to do is sort out qualifying. Even the most casual fans understand that Red Bull is a fast car. Max Verstappen, yes, is a fast driver, but he's also in a very fast car. This Adrian Newey car is going to go down in history as one of the greatest and one of the best, and it could potentially win records. For Perez to keep struggling to get out of Q1 and Q2, to even make it into Q3, is tragic and it's kind of embarrassing. I like Perez, don't get me wrong, I really do like him. He did a great job when he was at Force India and he saved the team. He seems like a really nice guy. But he's really embarrassing himself. Struggling to get out of Q1 at Silverstone was like the lowest of the lows. He needs to sort out his qualifying. He needs to make sure that he's in the top 10 every weekend. Every qualifying there is in the top 10 at a minimum. You'd think that qualifying at the lower ends of the top 10 would be embarrassing for him. But Q1 is just too much. So I would say going forward for Perez, if he wants to keep his seat next year, the minimum qualifying performance he has to do, he has to be in the top 4, the top 2 rows. Ideally, he needs to be qualifying second, but obviously he's not going to do that every race. But if he can't qualify second at the bare minimum, he has to be either 3rd or 4th. He has to be in the front 2 rows. That's what I think he needs to do going forward for the rest of the year. And then after that, I would say that Perez should always aim for bare minimum second. Yes, dream about beating Max, but the bare minimum that he should be aiming for is second place. And if he can't get second place, then he has to be on the podium. He has to be on the podium for the rest of the season. Yeah, that's his target. Bare minimum is 3rd place on the podium. Starting on the front 2 rows and then finishing on the podium would be very respectful for Perez, and it would help him a great deal with his goals of keeping the seat next year. And then obviously for Perez keeping the seat, there is another factor that's involved, and that's Riccardo's performance. So if Perez does improve his qualifying performance and improve his race performance where he's backing up Max or getting the odd win, maybe, you know, when there's another street circuit. If Riccardo's not performing well at AlphaTauri, then that obviously helps Perez getting a new contract for next year and staying on as a Red Bull driver. If he demonstrates that this is just a minor blip that's not going to be repeated throughout this year, and he can guarantee that it's not going to be repeated next year, because let's not forget that the teams are going to start catching up to Red Bull, and next year when the new cars come out, they'll be a lot closer to Red Bull. Max is not going to be able to win a championship by himself. Next year, yes, the Red Bull pretty much will be the fastest car and the car to beat, but with the teams closer, Max is going to need a backup driver. He's going to need a number 2 driver to take points away from the rivals or get involved in a team tactical race. So if Perez can demonstrate that he's back and is able to do that and is able to be like what it was in Abu Dhabi 2021, where it was like the ultimate number 2 driver that day, if he can demonstrate he can do all that kind of thing again, then he'll be rewarded with a seat. Now, Danny Ricciardo, obviously he's come back to AlphaTauri where it all began, and his goal is not to be an AlphaTauri driver next year. His goal is to be a Red Bull driver next year. I'm sure deep down he kind of regrets leaving Red Bull. He thought that he could get better opportunities somewhere else where he could build a team around him. He went to Renault, then he went to McLaren. We know what happened to McLaren. He struggled to adapt to the car for whatever reason, and when he came back to Red Bull, Christian Horner said that he picked up lots of bad habits in that McLaren. Hopefully they've ironed it out and now it's back to the old Danny Rick. But these remaining races, we need to see, is it the old Danny Ric or is it the McLaren Danny Ric? Because if he wants to be back in that Red Bull next year replacing Perez, he needs to be the old Danny Ric. And what I believe he needs to do, he needs to destroy Tsunoda. He needs to out-qualify him at pretty much every race. Maybe Tsunoda gets the one lucky qualifying ahead of him, you know, we'll give him that. The old Danny Ric, the one that's highly regarded, the one that we straight away would put in our top 5 best drivers on the grid, would destroy someone like Tsunoda. He would be like what Norris is to Oscar. He would be what Alonso is to Stroll. Verstappen to Perez. When you look at these teams, there's a clear number 1 driver, there's a clear driver doing better than the other one. That's what Riccardo needs to do. We don't need any close, like, oh, they're close teammates. Oh, it's like Ocon, Gasly, you know, they're quite close. Some races it's Ocon, some races it's Gasly, you know, oh, you know, it's close between the two. Riccardo needs to destroy Tsunoda. He needs to beat him at every qualifying. He needs to beat him in every race. And everyone just goes, yep, there's a clear better driver at AlphaTauri, and that driver's Danny Ric. That will significantly help his desires to get back into the Red Bull. And if he's doing that, and Perez is still having a patchy form and still doing his odd races where he's just inconsistent and just going out Q1, struggling to get into Q3 or qualifying in the lower ends of the top 10, and Danny Ric is doing that at AlphaTauri, then it's simple. It's easy swap. Perez out, Danny Ric in. I do believe that Perez is going to raise his game. So is this going out in Q1 thing is just like a minor blip. He's going to work out what he's doing wrong, especially over the summer break. He's going to think deep and hard, and he's going to come back and he's going to be a better driver. So that's why Danny Ric needs to significantly beat Tsunoda. It really needs to stand out, and it really needs to be made hard for Red Bull management to decide what to do. But there's a risk for Danny Ric. This is a very risky situation, a high risk situation for him. If Perez loses his seat, you can still see him being in Formula 1. He can go down the grid, he'll probably in a midfield team, I don't know, maybe replace Stroll at Aston Martin, something like that. Or maybe he'll appear in an Audi when they come. But if Riccardo doesn't do well this season, then his career could be over. His career's on the line. This could be the last time we actually see him race in Formula 1. These are these last few races. He has to prove that he's back. If he doesn't, then he could be game over. So what does Tsunoda need to do? Obviously Tsunoda came into Formula 1 and he was reckless, and obviously he has infamous for his like team radio outbursts. I personally don't rate Tsunoda. I personally don't rate him at all. I know he's improved this year, and I know people are saying that, you know, is doing really well and is a good driver. But you need to go back and you need to see who his teammate was, De Vries, and you need to go back to when he was Gasly's teammate. Gasly outbeat Tsunoda. So if you think Gasly and prime Danny Ric destroys Gasly. So Gasly is, you know, is a good driver, is a respectable driver, is a good driver. But you know, if Tsunoda couldn't match Gasly, and then Riccardo can't beat Tsunoda, then it just doesn't look good. So for Tsunoda to do well, for Tsunoda to get respect from people like me who still doubt his ability and still just see him as like a Honda pay driver, he needs to match Riccardo and he needs to beat Riccardo. If Riccardo destroys Tsunoda, then, you know, we will see that he's not the next great thing. But if he starts beating Riccardo, then people will sit up. I will sit up and I'll be like, okay, maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was. Because Tsunoda was paired with De Vries, it's like lowered his, for me, it lowered his like achievements. Like you look at Mick Schumacher when he was teamed up with Mazepin, like he was beating Mazepin and he looked good against Mazepin. But then as soon as K-Mag came in, you could see the significant improvement that the car had and the potential that the car had. So that's the same kind of thing that you could potentially be playing out now. Like Tsunoda and De Vries could be a Mick Schumacher and Mazepin. Maybe not as extreme, but you know what I mean. You can see what I'm trying to explain. So when K-Mag came in and became better than Mick Schumacher, you realise that Mick Schumacher wasn't as good as you originally thought. For Tsunoda to be respected, he needs to not be a Mick Schumacher. He needs to beat Riccardo or match Riccardo. He needs to be close. He needs to be close between the two. Because if it's a K-Mag, Mick Schumacher type thing, then no one's going to rate Tsunoda. No one's going to rate him. No one's going to think it's the next great thing. People will just say he's a Honda pay driver, and they'll be looking, Red Bull will be looking at Liam Lawson as a next future, and then they'll be looking to pass on Tsunoda to Aston Martin, when, you know, Aston Martin take those Honda engines. So it's high risk. It's high risk for all three drivers. What do I personally think is going to happen? Do you know what? It's just a tightrope. I can't predict it. I do predict that Perez will improve his performance. It is not this bad. It is not this bad. It's not as fast as Max, but it's not this bad. He's going through a patch for whatever reason, and he'll sort it out with him and his team and him and his like family or whatever. He'll sort it out. He'll be back. He'll be doing better than what he is doing now. So it comes down to what Danny Ricciardo can achieve, what he can bring to the table, and if he can significantly outperform Tsunoda and make that AlphaTauri look better than it is, then it'll be a really difficult decision for Red Bull in next year. I personally hope, although I do like Perez, I personally hope that the old Danny Ric is back and he does become the Alonso versus Lance Stroll or Max versus Perez. That's my hope. I hope that Danny Ric, the old Danny Ric that we all loved, and his dive bombs down the inside, the happy smiling Danny Ric of old, I hope he's back. If you found this video interesting, feel free to subscribe. Thank you for watching and enjoy the next race.